You are listening to Games from the Cellar, where we play board games and then we talk about them. I'm Steven, your host, and tonight I was joined by John, Chris, and Sam to play Kingsburg. Kingsburg, designed by Andrea, Chiarvesio, and Luca, Iennaco, was first published by Fantasy Flight Games in the US in 2008. In 2007, it won the Luca Games Best of the Best and Best Board Game Awards, the top awards in the Italian market. In 2008, Kingsburg was nominated for 2 Golden Geek Awards, Best Family Board Game and the Best Board Game Art/Presentation. A second edition was released in 2017 by Z-Man Games. At the time of this recording, Kingsburg has a 7.2 rating with 19,000 ratings on BoardGameGeek and has a ranking of 420. It's a 2 to 5 player lightweight family game that should play in about 90 minutes. Thank you for joining us in the cellar as we go in depth with Kingsburg. All right, so we got Kingsburg on the table. Who wants to say something about Kingsburg before we get started?
Man, it has been so long since I played Kingsburg. I honestly can't remember how long it's been.
So if it's been so long, what can you remember about how this game works?
I remember that... So you roll the dice, and that determines which of the advisors, I'm going to call them,
Sure.
you can select from, and they give you various resources and bonuses, and you build out your fief with the buildings. You get on the track, the better buildings are on the right. And every so often, you get attacked by hordes of enemies that you have to defend against, or they tear your stuff down.
Yeah.
I
remember...
I mean, that feels like the basics. I'm sure there's edge cases I don't remember.
Four seasons.
Yeah, there's 4 seasons. There's 8 phases. So
Yeah.
there's like a season and then like the transition.
Yeah.
And then the next season and then the transition.
Yeah, I like the building layout. I like that you go through that. It's like you build up.
Yeah, it's an early tech tree type of game.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tech tree. I like that. And I like the advisors, but I remember being very frustrated with the dice element because sometimes you just roll nothing
Garbage.
but just roll garbage. And
That's
you're like,
sort of what dice
And
are
it
for.
All
does
right.
seem like it gets stuck in a rut.
right, yeah. It didn't feel like there was much you could do. And I remember being very disenchanted with the game when you have 3-4 turns where you just roll garbage and you go, okay, well, on my turn, I'm going to do the same thing I did last turn.
Yeah.
And-
There are turns with certain dice rolls that can essentially play themselves with almost no input from you.
Yeah.
There is also the chance to be a dick and block
Oh,
something.
yeah, there's definitely blocking that can happen, and that's one of the things about Kingsburg that's both interesting and kind of a pain, is that it plays up to 5 people, and there's only 18 spots, and you say 18, but the common spots 1 through 6 get filled up real quick, and so it could be, if you had a terrible roll, that you only get to put out 1 dice worth of your roll. So
Right, and not be giving you what you want.
yeah, you could roll like a 13, but somebody gets on the 13 before you, and now you got to break that up into two or 3 different people, and the people coming ahead of you can either
Steal one of those,
purposely steal one, or it's the only move they can make, so they have to take it, and then you can kind of get hosed. So I mean, there's a push and a pull with that, and what you build in your fiefdom, as Sam's calling it, can really help you mitigate, because one of them gives you these 2 tokens where you can add them to a die or a set of dice to increase the value by 2. There's another one that gives you a white die that's essentially
A free die that you
free
can make
die, so
somewhere.
you're
Yeah.
using 4 dice instead of 3 dice. And then some of them allow you to trade resources for other resources. So, I mean, depending on how you build out your little town can kind of help you or hinder you, because you may be going for military, and if you go military, then
Not a lot of points in military.
yeah, I mean, depending on what the cards are, but yeah.
Yeah.
So and really building your town, like, you can have a plan, like, I want to build a fortress. Well, I'm not rolling enough stone, so I can't really get to that.
Yeah.
So, it kind of...
So it's a game where to some extent you have to roll with the punches. You have to deal with what's given to you. And for the most part, you can usually kind of grind your way to where you want to go. Mm-hmm. But it never hurts to kind of follow your dice lead when they come up.
So we mentioned in the Alien Frontiers episode that we recorded earlier, they're very similar games in that you're rolling dice and you're using those dice as your workers, or you're gathering your resources and doing things based on what you roll. And with Alien Frontiers, some of the spots have multiple slots that you can go into so you can share with players. And then in Alien Frontiers as well, like every die roll has a purpose. So if you roll like 3 1s, you're not completely hosed because... 3 1s is actually a pretty good spot to be in. I posited that with Kingsburg, it's really about who rolls the highest number of rolls altogether. So, for instance, if you take the sum total of all the rolls that you make throughout the game, my hypothesis is that whoever rolls the highest has a really good chance of winning.
Okay, so this gets a little more complicated because if you pick up a white die, suddenly you're going to roll better than anybody. Everybody who's rolling 3 dice is going to be harder pressed to roll higher than you if you're rolling 4.
Somehow, when I get the white die, I don't find it difficult to be down with everybody else.
I remember it basically being a D3.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to record our dice rolls to see how things turn out. Do you want to include the white dice, or do you want to not include the white dice?
I mean,
I feel like we should.
You're rolling dice.
You have to.
Yeah, why would you not?
Because that's going to show that person rolled that much more.
If you feel that it would be valuable to
how do you get
the results of the white die, I think you build a farm.
Yeah, the farm.
You can build a farm, but there's also, if you look at the first season, just before we go into the first season, the person that has the least amount of structures gets the white die for one roll. And then the unique thing with the white die is it does have to be combined with another colored die. You can't just set it somewhere on its own.
Right.
Because there is going to be the opportunity for several of us to have an extra white die, sometimes 2.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't want to, ruin the game by suggesting we do that. It's just going to be a fun experiment, and then the next time we play, we're not going to track it. I just kind of want to see if that works out that way, but... going back and thinking about all the times that we've played this, I really do enjoy Kingsburg. I do recall it being one of the first more complicated games that we would play as a group, or when I joined the group. You guys probably have played all kinds of things before that, but this one always stood out to me, and I've always enjoyed this one. So I'm excited to get rolling with it.
I think part of it is the board. It's very pleasing, very easy to understand. There's once you learn what the symbols mean, it's very clear. There's not this, what does that do over there, or anything like that. Like each number all the way through 18, you understand what they are, you understand the combat. It makes it it's a beautiful game, and it's very easy to understand. I'm looking at the game upside down, and I can understand what each number gives me. There's not a lot of confusion.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and play Kingsburg, and we'll let you know what we thought when we get done. Kingsburg, it's done. I was wrong.
That was grueling.
Well, which part was keeping track?
Actually, I kept track of the dice rolls. That may have been the most grueling part of playing this game. This is a soft kind of, run through the roses kind of game. It's light. It's nice, but unless you think too much about your dice placement.
Yeah, this is a solid family weight game.
Yes, it is.
So it's real light, and there's decisions to be made, but there's no direct conflict, and even the conflict that's in the game that comes from the cards is pretty tame.
It's not terribly engaging.
Well, it's not engaging for you because you're awful at it. You disengaged with it. I think that's your fault.
I guess.
And it's not your kind of game. It doesn't have 13 things that are all interdependent upon each other that need to be built up in such an order, and then you score 7 different.
It's not but I've enjoyed light games. I don't know what this game just has never clicked for me.
How many times have you played it?
We played it a fair number of times back when we were meeting upstairs. So probably 4 or 5.
I'll say 5.
Yeah, a number.
Yeah, I know I played it a lot more than that because we played it a lot with different groups. And we played it. This was one that came out a lot when we did our Delaware Gameathon.
Yeah, probably more than I could count on one hand.
Yeah, and I know this is also one of those games where we have two. Well, I say we have 2 copies in the group. The gentleman that has the other copy is kind of moved on and is no longer a part of the group. But
we've got the copy we need.
I mean, even at the time, we had 2 copies running around, so that kind of gives you an idea of, at the time, how this was getting a lot of play because we needed 2 copies in circulation.
And I think there was one time one room was playing it and the other room was playing it. Mm-hmm. He did have the one that had the expansion, which added a couple different variations, allowed you to go a little different way from other people.
Yeah, some of the So the expansion is actually just a bunch of modules that you tack on. It doesn't change any of the core rules. It doesn't change any of the board or the play, really. I think there's 3 modules. We've only ever played with 2, I think. No, there's 4 modules. So the expansion has 4 modules. The one is the governors, if I recall, is a card that you get that's some kind of magistrate that you are that gives you some kind of bonus.
I've never seen that, but
I have never played with any of the expansions.
One time, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong.
Yeah, the only thing that I remember is it added a new. You have the 4 zones that you can build in. You covered one of the zones.
5 zones.
5 zones.
So yeah, you got the village board.
It's been a while since I played.
You got the village board like inserts or cover-ups so that you could have a slightly different village than the players next to you. And then you had the military chips that instead of rolling dice, you could use the chips to augment your military. And then you get points at the end of the game for...
If you keep them.
If you don't use them. And then I feel like one of them was an event deck. But...
That I do not recall, but yeah, there were 2 or 3 pieces in that expansion. I remember thinking the one where you replaced one of your tech lines on your board. I thought that one was kind of interesting. The other 2, I remember thinking kind of
the military kind of took a lot out of it, where you could choose what your
well, right? Because I'll be honest with you, the reason I think this game, and I'm not a big fan of worker placement, so there's part of this game where I'm sitting there grinding, like, okay, so I got to figure out all my combinations and figure which is the least worst of them. That stuff doesn't excite me so much. But the one thing that I think gives this game some heat, first of all, the dice rolling is nice for what you can pick because you can kind of work your angles on what people can block you on and what they can't, and you can set those aside for a moment because you get them at the end. But the other thing is that kind of press your luck aspect that, boy, I can build a church, which is a lot of points, but I'm going to risk it. I got to hope that the king puts enough troops in on that die roll when you're going against that mystery army that's going to come after you. And I think that adds a lot of heat to the game. There's enough unpredictability there that you got to decide if you want to push your luck or not. And do you want to play it safe or do you want to go for it? And obviously, if you're behind, you're a little bit more inclined to go for it so that you can catch up. Mm-hmm. And if you're in front, you got a tougher decision to make. Do you want to stay put or do you want to try and jump out and stay ahead of everybody else as they're trying to grab you? So I think that's always been a real fun part of the game. Is as far as I'm concerned, that's what gives the game some life. Mm-hmm. And those chips where you get the military, it's like, okay, so it's just one more place where you're optimizing, and at that point, I don't think it's nearly as much fun.
Yeah, you're taking the randomization out and swapping it for optimization.
Yeah,
and yeah, there's decisions to be made. There's a decision space, but it's not a very exciting decision space. It's one decision that you make at the end as you come to battle, where
if you've got a lot of knowledge to make that decision.
And if you don't have that, if you're relying on a die roll, then the whole year becomes a decision space because then you have to decide, do you want to build things that give you military?
Yep.
Do you want to buy military units? Mm-hmm. Or do you want to hope that the king, whoever rolls for the king, rolls high enough and the king gives you enough reinforcements? So I do agree. It's.
I can see how having chits for that would be not an interesting decision, right? But for myself, I think the die rolling isn't very interesting either, frankly. A lot of the time it feels like either the king rolls high enough to trivialize whatever the threat is, or the king doesn't roll high enough and everybody loses.
Yeah.
Because it's a 6-sided die, and the threat ranges from 2 to 9. So, yeah, it doesn't feel like an interesting chance to me.
Yeah, the first 3 rounds can almost be negated by just the king's roll.
Well, they can, literally.
Can, yeah. Right. And so, like, the real stakes only kind of happen in year 4 and year 5. And I know John engaged, well, I mean...
unless you roll a 1.
Unless you roll a 1, yeah.
Which
but,
we did.
But that doesn't...
If you go with the average die roll of 3.5...
Which you never roll once.
Well, I mean, but we rolled... Anyway. I rolled a 6 until Chris made me re-roll it.
Oops.
Anyway, you engaged the designer at one point because the cards almost feel, like Sam was saying, kind of trivial because... They're kind of on the lower end of where you would expect them.
It's not too hard to be safe in battle. A little bit of effort is usually going to get you safe in battle.
Yeah.
And this came up in a forum, and I kind of, asked him just directly. I said, "Hey, this ain't the toughest thing in the world." And his response back was essentially, "Yeah, we looked at that an awful lot, and we decided we wanted this to be more of a family game, so we didn't want."
Yeah. It's definitely not a combat game. It's not something that you fear huge repercussions
now,
by having your city overrun.
So if you wanted to, you could just say, let's add 2 to the number of every threat, and then suddenly the game becomes a whole lot more interesting.
It changes everything.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it becomes more interesting.
Well,
frankly.
it becomes more interesting in that one aspect. It would completely shift your focus in the way
You'd
that the game
have
is
to build
played.
your military.
Sure, sure.
And
I'm
you'd
just
have to pick the spaces on the board. So you're giving up the opportunity to build bigger buildings because you're using up spaces, getting that short-term army for the 1 year, and
you definitely want to be able to look at what is coming.
Does not hurt.
I'm just saying, I don't think, frankly, I don't think that the military aspect is terribly engaging, even if it is more threatening.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think that there's much bite design-wise there.
I don't think that that's the point we're trying to make. I think the point is that it would. By increasing that threat, it actually would shift the whole focus of the game, and it might... I mean, if you're pigeonholed in having to build, like, the first 3 military buildings, the game suddenly becomes less fun because, those decisions are kind of made for you. You can... With the way the game is now, you can almost ignore that 1 military row because it gives you, like, I think 3 or 4 total military...
Gives you 3.
And you could still do okay. Like, you could buy, like, a couple of reinforcements, and the king could roll a 5 or a 6, and
you skate.
And you skate. You're fine. So, if you increase that, then you're essentially pigeonholing people into building those.
Right, even more. I mean, that last round, where I didn't lose, I tied, right? But I didn't have any options there. Right, because all of the military spaces that were within my reach were selected before it got to my turn.
In the fall.
So you're right. I could have chosen them earlier.
Yeah, and I chose the building that allowed me to get 1 extra military whenever I did a military action. So for
I saw that and went after that as well.
Yeah,
and I don't think that you need to do it 2. I think just raising it by 1, because you think about how many times we tied on it.
Yeah.
I mean, just by 1 just gives you that. Ooh, even if the king rolls a 6, I still got to have a 2 or a 3 military.
Right, and with that in place, and I was +3 for a lot of the fights. That there were times when it's like, okay, so I get it automatically because even if he rolls a 1, I'm going to tie.
Yeah,
and I'm not.
To me, it's not the number. It's not the strength threshold that needed to be adjusted. It was the risk and the reward that needed to be adjusted. So, for instance, that last. Year 5 card, if you lost 8 victory points, and if you won, you only gained 1.
Yeah.
So
it almost feels too granular.
Yeah, I mean, for that particular one.
Well, for
some
for
of the
all
other
of
ones,
them too. There's no
what do you mean
UI.
by too granular.
So there's only 3 outcomes, right? You tie, in which case you get nothing. You lose, you get the penalty, or you win and you get 1 point. Generally, sometimes you don't even get a point. It feels like what would you could make it more interesting by having it be a range of things, right? If you're within 1 point of it, then you get a minor negative effect or a minor positive.
Granular. You'd like more possible outcomes.
Sorry, granular is the wrong word there. It feels too. It's very binary, right? You either lose, in which case the terrible thing happens to you, or the not so terrible thing, or you win and you get like a point. Have fun.
Yeah, and there's enough variability the real variability is in the penalties. I mean, some of the penalties are you lose your best building that.
Well, frankly, that -8 points one is nasty. I think the best building gives you 9 points.
Yeah.
So losing 8 points is bad.
You're losing your best building for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and you can't. I mean, it was the last round, so it didn't matter. But if there had been another round, those are 8 points you can't regain by building the thing again.
Because you're not getting it done that quick because they're so expensive.
Yeah.
So no, I agree. I think the rewards and punishments are severe enough that you need to. It keeps you honest. But yeah, I agree. I think at times it's a little soft. Now it's funny. Shortly after I had that conversation with him, we played a game where every single card draw was the worst possible. They were all at the top end of the strength.
I think I remember having that discussion the last time I played this. Was that if you draw like the low value cards for the threats, they don't matter. They don't matter at all.
But when we pulled all high, and I remember at one point, Chris and I got to look at the card towards the end, and we're like, "Holy crap! It's the worst one again." And we're kind of looking at each other, and the other two players were like, "Oh, you guys are punking us."
That's wow, true. Who knew there were dragons?
Yeah, that's right. You guys, you're just working us, and we're like, "No, it's really that bad."
It was like after the second turn, we had both put on the double military and the single military were gone. We had built up our palisades,
and they thought we were teasing them, and it did not work out very well. But on occasion, the cards can turn that way and be pretty rough. But I'd like to see that. I'd like to see those be a little bit rougher at the end. So.
This was an interesting game where I don't think I've ever played it with 4 people where every single person took the market and the inn. Usually somebody will go different routes. So every one of us had the ability to go up or down with one of our advisors.
Yeah, I kind of had to do that because I was rolling these very middling dice. And
it was very interesting as well. It was like, how many times did 17 and 18 get taken?
We got a bunch of 17s.
But I mean, did people, maybe 3 times took actual 17 advisor? It
if you roll 17, you get a lot of options. 17 gives you victory points, which is always nice, and it's 3 victory points, and we had 10 between us total, so that's not a bad poll. But if you're sitting on 2 6s and a 5, you've got other options as well. So you either split them up and get a couple of bites at the apple, 2 nice big numbers, or you go after the one big one.
Yeah, and if you have the modifiers, 2 6s and a 5, that gives you can split them up and you have an additional 5 pips to kind of go around. Yeah. Because you can put a 2 with both
especially
of those.
If you have plus 2s and
if you have an extra die, well, if you roll really well, you can get 2 things in the up and around 10, and that's great.
And right below her is the wizard who gives you 4 gold. And I ended up going 17 and backing it off 1 so that I could get 4 gold because I was working on that top row to pick up the victory points, and it's all gold.
All gold.
So that more or less paid for 2 steps on that line just with that one pull.
Yeah, I found later on in the game I was having a hard time finding wood.
Yeah, because there's no way to get 2 wood except for the wild cards. There's 2 and 3. You can get 3 stone. You get 4 gold, but you couldn't get 2 wood.
Yeah. So if you're trying to backfill something small, you're kind of
I gambled on that a couple times that I would be able to get wood with the trading, and everybody had the market. So if you had a 4, 3, 4, 5, or a 6, you could basically with your plus 2 get into where that is, and it was just
there was a lot of competition for that spot. Yeah. I do like the board with the buildings on it. I think that's fun.
I wish it was different. Like
I wish it was
having
different.
The exact same thing.
There's a lot of the things that I took in my head. I was like, oh, this will pay off later in the game, and they didn't. Yeah. Right? The game didn't last long enough for them to pay off.
Well, it's like on that one row. It's like at the end you get a victory point after each season,
right?
But you're not building that until like the end of turn 4.
Right.
The season 4.
I was like, okay, great.
You're going to get like 4
I mean,
points,
frankly, Chris, you won. You had, I think, a single tier 3 building.
I had 2 tier
3. You had 2 tier 3 buildings.
Yeah. No tier 4.
But that was it, right? You filled out the back, and I think those were like your last couple buildings.
The last couple were actually 1 and 2s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
I stayed ahead on buildings. I was able to build each time.
Right.
I got that
The
victory
point
point every
I'm
time that
making
came around.
is I built a 4, and then I got blown up, and then I built a couple different 3s, and I came in last.
Yeah. I had a 4 and 2 3s.
Yeah, I finished with 1 4 and 1 and 2 3s.
Yeah. So the guy who won did not build any of the highest ranked buildings.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like, they're expensive.
Yeah.
And aside from
Yeah,
the Wizard
they're 2
Tower.
3-turn buildings.
Yeah. And aside from the Wizard Tower that gives you the 2 extra military that allows you to then not, in 6 points, it allows you to kind of focus less on the smaller military buildings. And then the Cathedral, which is just 9 points. You know, other than those 2, the other 5 tier 5 buildings just don't seem worth it. Because what was it?
It's victory points. One of the upper right, the cathedral, I
The
think.
cathedral.
It's 7 points,
Yeah.
and that's a big chunk. And I was looking at that, but I just kind of ran out of time because I
No,
had a
I
couple
think
bad
the
rolls at
church
end.
was 7
The
points.
church
The
was 7.
cathedral was
Cathedral
9.
was 9.
It's 9.
So
Yeah.
there was the one military building that essentially said if you win a victory against the monsters in winter, you get an additional victory
Victory
point.
point. But it was
That's
only
the one
4
I grabbed.
base.
Right.
It was 4
So
base.
if you
and
build
then
it-
you built it, and it's going to take you a while to build it. You might get 2,
So
maybe 3
if you
uses out of
if you
that.
build it as soon as you physically can, it's the 4th building, so you're not building it until spring of the 2nd year, which means you can get 4 more points. So
but you have
so
to-
in a perfect situation, you get 8 points out of it.
Yeah, but
Plus
you have
defense and
to.
some
You're going to
other
have to roll
bennies.
the
yeah.
maximum amount.
yeah,
of
no, that
resources
would be-
possible.
and give up on building other things.
Yeah, that would be what you built.
Yeah.
And so that's that's sort of the nature of the game. Is that there's this fair amount of this game that I know some people like to build out one row very quickly, and everybody sort of has a favored row that they like. But there's something to be said for kind of building out evenly so that you get the one row is giving you a lot of victory points.
Well,
the
now
other one's
that-
allowing you to adjust your dice.
Well,
so
now
on
that
and so
we're
forth.
talking about it, the bottom right one was like a town hall or something. No, I forget what it was, but it was worth 3 points, and I think you got an extra point at the end of every
At the end of every productive season.
at the end of every productive season, which could be a lot of points.
Yeah.
But you got to
If you
build it
build
up
it
there.
early enough.
You got to build
Yeah.
it up there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not building it by like round 3, you're probably better off building the cathedral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The crazy one is the one that gives you a victory point for every resource and 2+2 token.
That's the cathedral, right?
No, that's
Oh.
the town hall.
That's the town.
It
hall.
lets you once every productive season you
No,
can
no.
spend
This
something.
Is the end game.
The end game?
At the end of the game,
The
all
cath-
your
the
resources.
the
That is the
cathedral,
cathedral.
it was 1 point for every 2 resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the town hall was the one that you could turn in either
Yeah.
a +2 or
And
a stone or any
And I made some
resource.
points off of that.
I did as well.
I made some points off of that.
At the
but
end of the game, I knew what I needed, and I think I got 3 extra points in the last on the last year.
All right, so I pulled the card out. The embassy is the bottom right. That one gives you, it's worth 4 points, and at the end of each productive season, you gain. At the end of each productive season, you gain 1 victory point. So, if you build that one out quickly, you could potentially get another 6 points. If
A lot
you
of
get
points.
it out by the end of the second year.
third year. Third year.
But you're losing
year.
the ability to defend yourself.
Yeah, because
Right,
that
it's-
track has no
It has +1 against goblins,
have +1 against goblins.
which I
That's
think
it.
I don't remember that ever being relevant.
I mean, we
No, we didn't have goblins.
had goblins the first round.
No,
No, we
zombies the
didn't.
first
Those
round.
zombies.
Zombies the first round.
No,
The
I mean,
crane on
I
that
mean-
row was
I mean,
nice.
The
So-
crane is nice, right? And that's what I'm saying. To a certain extent, you have to build evenly for the first 1 or 2, just because you want that crane, you want that.
I mean, you want the inn,
those
you want
other
the market.
Yeah, so that those allow you to those give you the versatility later in the game to get to spots that other people are getting. And once you guys started getting all those white dice, a lot more could get filled up because you were getting 2 and 3 placements each turn instead of 1 and 2. And I never got white dice the entire time, and I don't think I did badly in spite of that. I think I was getting other things, but I wasn't getting it from having the least number of buildings, and I never build out to whatever. What is it? The farm
farms.
that gets it for you.
Yeah.
I kept looking at it. I was kind of building in that direction, but it never.
Farm
came
gives you
together.
2 points, but then you also lose 1 point in battle, so it's kind of
defense.
like
Yeah,
so-
and I built the farm. I built it right away because I looked at it. I was like, well, this lets me do more things.
More dice.
And I don't think it was worth it.
Well, and I'll tell you what we did is we wrote down all our rolls this time, and I'm the guy who never had a white die even once, and I had 166 total pips. That's rolling my 3 red dice for every season. The highest was 194, so that's 28 more. And there's 193, so that was Sam, you had the highest with 194. Steven, you were 193. Chris, you were third with 173, and I was 166. So our game was very close, and our die rolls, including those white dice, which you had one forever, and you had two.
I won with the
for a
farm,
fair
and
chunk
then
of
I
time.
had the 2-1. I had 2 for 3 years running because I had the least amount of buildings.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had a pile of dice, and you ended up with less than 30 more than me, who was rolling 3 all the time.
Yeah, but I also had a 21 and a 22.
You also had
I also had a 4. But yeah.
That's when you wish you had the chapel.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right, and I was always rolling 8s. And the other you talk about rolling low numbers. It's not just rolling low numbers. If you roll a 6 and 2 3s, that's actually a fairly solid roll, but you have 0 options because it's a 6 and 2 3s.
Yeah,
and that's
your
why you
options
have
are
to
6.
build. That's why you have to build the things
6.
that allow you to get the ability to move one spot to
one
the
up
left
or down,
right,
yeah.
pick
And
up
the plus
plus
two.
Right. I mean, that's why I think most of us beelined for that, just because it opens up so much of the
Yeah, and
of the board for you to choose from.
Like
I mean,
I
the
said, when you
the
get those sorts of
flexibility
rolls,
is necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the flexibility is actually the flexibility is definitely one of the most powerful.
Right. I think I might even go so far as to say if you didn't go for that as soon as possible, you were doing something wrong.
Yeah. It's well, in the end also
The end's good too, right?
the end's good too. You get a free +2 token at the end of the summer round.
right?
I mean, I think
And
we
then
all built
we
the
all had
end,
the
the
end,
first
we all had the
first
market.
build phase.
Yeah.
No, I built Palisade first build phase.
Yeah.
Okay. So
By the end
3
of
of
the
us.
first, at the
Yeah,
end of
exactly
the first
that goal.
year, we all had the end.
By the end of summer.
By the end
we
of
all
summer,
had-
you had an in.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah. I like
I
to
think
get
that
to
was
the
my
Merchants
second
Guild because you were getting that free gold every time.
Yeah, for a bit, and then it blew up
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
because Chris made us re-roll from a 6 to a 4.
I just didn't want to change the way that we were doing
Something about the rules.
Yeah, rules, they're kind of important, right?
I saw his eyes light up when he was like, "No, we got to re-roll that 6."
it. If Steven had rolled a 1, you would have said the same thing. If it had been the other way around.
Maybe.
Boy, I sure would have.
Yeah.
I would have worked that for sure. So all in all, I think we all enjoy the game. Sam, it sounds like maybe you don't enjoy it quite as much as
He's a
the
little
other three
medium
of us.
on it.
I have actively avoided playing this game.
So, in all the times that you've played it, have you ever enjoyed a game of Kingsburg?
Maybe the first playthrough. I think my complaint with this game is that I don't really feel like there's a lot of growth as you play the game.
Okay.
Like you build things and maybe you pick up a die and so on, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of growth. It just feels like you roll the dice and you make your actions and you do the same thing 15 times and then it ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty channeled. I'll give
And
you that.
and you don't grow beyond that. You don't develop in a specific direction. You just do the same little mini game 15 times and then you see who wins.
Yeah, and if you see people on the internet, they'll all talk about what the optimal way to win is. These are the buildings you buy, and this is the order you do it in.
And frankly, if I were more engaged with the game,
So
I
what
think
would you
that would be
change?
my next complaint. But
So you're king for a day. What do you change?
if I were king for a day, frankly, so I like the core mechanic of you roll the dice and you place them on the advisors and you're competing for spaces. I think that's fun. I like you build things and they have different resource costs and you build up in a line like a tech tree. That's fine. I enjoy that. Frankly, I think what's coming to mind now is Mosaic, where you have different kinds of production. Right? So I think I would generalize it rather than just being you get the same thing for the same role the entirety of the game. I'd find some way to diversify that. Yeah. And frankly, for military, which I don't find engaging at all, I think it'd be interesting if you had kind of like a bidding system where it's not we're all individually fighting off the zombie hordes. It's the zombie hordes are attacking the kingdom. How much do you want to invest in the defense? There's points to be earned there if you invest the most, but I think I'd probably have it so there's not really anything to be gained if you're not investing the most. But if collectively we don't invest enough, then bad things happen.
Okay.
I think that would be more interesting because then I'm gambling
I've heard
like,
of games
oh.
that do things like that. I can't recall what they are, but it's always seemed to be an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Like
It is
like
right
you
on the
have-
tip of my tongue. There's that one where, it's kind of, it's the one with the dice and the chips. It's like Kill Dr. Lucky.
Yeah, Kill Dr. Lucky, where you can essentially snooker the last person in the loop.
You have got to place your 6 chips that you just hard
Right,
earned to make sure that the guy next to you doesn't win.
And that rule is very problematic in Kill Dr. Lucky because the way at least in the most recent version, the way the rules are written, the last person is just stuck. There's no negotiation. There's no way for them to play some brinkmanship and say, well, maybe I won't put that much down. It's like, no, according to the rules, you are stuck whether you like it or not. And that sort of falls apart. But I don't doubt you can find a way to make that work, is everybody can bid a number of armies, and whoever bids the most somehow gets a reward, and whoever bids the least somehow gets a penalty, whether you win or lose, and it could just vary depending on how you win.
Well, I think
So
the
that
catch.
could be a more interesting play.
I think the catch there would be, if you bid the least, you don't get a penalty. Unless,
King's pissed off if you
No,
don't show up with your troops.
I think the penalty there is you don't get a bonus.
It's the lazy Carl.
I think the penalty there is that if you don't.
Yeah, maybe.
I think the penalty there is if collectively you lose, the penalty is harsher depending on how many troops you committed.
I agree with that. If
I think that's the penalty.
If as a group you don't bring up enough troops and everybody gets hurt, but if you show up with the least, the King's not going to be pleased with that. You were supposed to show up with as much as everybody else. Are you the kingdom in the swampy land where you can't raise as many troops?
Okay, sure. And if we're interested in like accurately modeling a feudal relationship, sure. But that's not what the game's about.
I'm sure the king's just going to be happy that we won,
Right. This is
or really pissed off that we lost.
All right, this is
and so if you bid the highest and you win, the highest person gets the best, and if you
lose
and you
then
sent the least,
whoever's
then
the
you're going to
worst
get
person.
hit the hardest.
Yeah.
That would be sort of interesting if there were 4 penalties and the penalties were based on whether you sent the most, middle, or least.
Yeah, I think that would be more interesting.
Okay.
that could
It's
be
just
more interesting.
So is it secret bidding or?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
okay.
totally.
Just checking.
Totally.
Figured as
Secret
much.
Fists
bidding.
in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fists in.
Fists and dragons.
I think that's the military, right? My core complaint with this game is that it feels like you do the same thing
You do
15
You
times
quite
and
literally
I
do
agree.
that.
nothing changes, and I really like my games to change. I mean, we talked about this before with, I think, Arc Nova, and where it's like it's nice to look at the board game at the end and be like, all right, this is what changed for me over the course of the game.
Yeah, I don't think that was Arc Nova because
wasn't?
You have a green blob at the end
Oh, right.
with no personality.
But well, again, here, I don't feel like there's any personality.
Yeah, I think the big thing that would change that is this almost like this tech tree that we're building. If you had it to where the first thing you build, and then that's where your town is focused on, or something like that. Just something variability that
and
would
that might
change
be
it up,
more
so we're
interesting.
all not working on the exact same thing.
So
I
this
agree.
was designed in 2007, and the whole idea of variable player setups and chasing that dream of everyone can go in a completely different direction, and that just wasn't in vogue yet.
Yeah, the asymmetric play was not as exciting.
I think with the expansion, when you start throwing down the alternate rows, I think that solves that problem.
That mixes some of that up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because you have an individually unique row that only you have access to, or a combination of rows that only you have access to.
Yeah.
And I can't recall, do you get to choose what covers it up, or do you have to match them up and cover?
I don't recall.
I don't recall either, but
Yeah.
either
But,
way.
That's an interesting observation just on the industry as a whole. Is back when this game was coming out, it was more a battle of wits, and therefore everything had to be identical so that you could say you had won fairly and beaten your other players. Which,
Right,
of course, in a
and-
game like Kingsburg doesn't make any sense because you're all rolling dice, and you could just roll bony dice, and that's your toast.
And that's fine. And I'm not sure asymmetrical is necessarily necessarily the way to go
but
here.
Nowadays,
I just think they're not interesting.
That has changed. Nowadays, everybody is dying for asymmetric. I mean, games like Root are like, no matter what, everybody has to be completely different.
I mean, everyone's playing a different game in Root.
Yes, and nobody was touching on that stuff just 15 years ago. Not only were they not designing that way. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but I don't think it would have been culturally acceptable. I think people were. Why would you do that?
This was designed to be a family game. As such, you're going to be playing with younger members of the family, and they need to be kind of on the same page.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
yeah,
it's
certainly easier because part of the challenge with getting into Root is everybody's got a different set of rule sets they have to learn. Every time you switch factions, you have to learn new rules. Whereas this, everybody can help each other and check each other on the rules because you're all playing the exact same game.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I was saying about Mosaic. Like, you want a rule set, at least in a family game, where all the rules are presented to you at the beginning or at the same time, and everyone at the table can absorb most of, if not all of the rules, because you don't want the rules to be the emergent gameplay. You want the strategy and the tactics to be the emergent gameplay. Because in a game like this, if it's a family game, you really want little Johnny on the other side of the table to not be disadvantaged because he doesn't understand all the rules that you understand,
and he's able to ask and get an answer quickly because everybody at the table understands the same rule set.
So I mean, it is supposed to be simple. And I think that's kind of your hang-up is you think it's a simple game. It is a simple game.
I mean, I guess that is what it boils down to, right? I think that it's just not terribly interesting to play.
Yeah, and honestly, when we pulled it out, I sat here and I thought about it. I was like, Chris does not have the expansion. And without those additional rows, I wasn't sure that I was going to enjoy this as much as I normally do because I really feel like that aspect, especially with the way...
a nice flavor. Yeah.
Especially with what you expect in a game in 2022, like you need that little bit of variability. You need that little bit of this is mine and this is different than you.
Yeah. I think it was you couldn't find the expansions. I think I looked for them.
You could not find Kingsburg for the longest time. The other copy our group had of this game was... essentially, he had to build his own because he could not find a copy for love or money.
Oh, no, I'm talking about Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle.
Oh, Kyle
Wayne
well.
had
so that's 3 copies. That
yeah. So we had the original...
What's a copy?
We had the original Kyle copy, and Kyle somehow got the base game and the expansion set. Wayne, on the other hand, because this game was out of print for such a long time, he
made one.
He PNP'd it. Like he got all the files, he printed it off, and that's what we played on. Because, I mean, we can debate the merits and the ethics of that all day, but if it's not available,
it's not available.
It's not available.
Yeah. Just to be clear, we do have a purchase copy.
This is a purchase copy, yes. I mean, I don't fault him at all for that because I think at that point there was enough of a demand for it that Fantasy Flight needed to reprint it, and eventually they did. It's a second edition. I don't know.
Yes, now the new version is out. I don't know if that includes the expansion or not.
I don't know what's different about it. I know there are differences.
Download a car.
What?
You mentioned like, is it ethical to download the files and print them your own? Like, sure, whatever.
It's no more ethical to download a car.
Right. It's no more unethical than downloading a car.
Yeah, but you don't have the materials to build a car.
Yeah, and I don't think you necessarily download a car. You can just go next door and grab somebody's car.
It costs you a couple $100,000 to build your own car.
Okay, but that's the argument, right? Is it ethical to download something and build it yourself?
The ethics of it is whether or not you're taking money from the people that it rightfully should be going to, and in this case, because there was no product available. Had it been readily available and he just didn't want to pay the $60 for it,
that would be another story.
I do believe that he did tell me that he had bought a newer version of it.
But out of print's a whole other story. I think it's very interesting that a game that was in the heart of the market in the mid 2000s. I don't think this game would be as well received now because it is so dependably similar between all the players. Where in the past, I think that was almost a given, almost a requirement for a commercial product. Nowadays, everybody is looking for that asymmetry. They want to play a new game every time they play, and that's every player gets some special rule or some special faction where they're doing their own.
Well,
thing.
I think the crux of the issue here isn't necessarily that you start in the same place as everybody else. It's that
You almost end in the same
end
place.
in the same place as everybody else.
Yeah, there's limited options.
There's no divergence at all.
There's
really.
a little divergence.
All right,
but
so there's like
teeny
teeny tiny.
Yeah, I get it. Like when you look at the little village board here, I mean, to not take the inn in the market, you're severely hampering yourself.
You have to be trying, basically.
And you can argue about the farms if you want. You can do with or without it, whatever. I mean, both Sam and I had it, and Sam was in last place, and I was in second place. So you can argue the merit there. But I mean, we all took the inn, we all took the market, and then we all pretty much took the guard tower. So those three were automatically,
and that's fine. But the point is that whole optimal play. I mean, chess is the same every single time, and people play it thousands of times.
Yeah, but you don't have to roll dice in chess.
No,
that's an important point.
Setting that aside, I think what I'm saying is back then, that was okay to have a game that was very, very similar every single time you played it, and you scored a couple of extra points this time because you worked this one particular angle. I don't think people are looking for that in games anymore, and the dice is whether you like that level of luck or not, and there's certainly a whole lot of merit to the argument that you're making that's not something that you find particularly interesting. I'm just surprised that the market has changed that much. I honestly think there's a big difference. I think if all of us kind of magically went back in time to 2005, we'd be kind of drumming our fingers and going, seriously? These days games all kind of look alike. I mean, they're all doing about the same thing, and they're all brown for some reason. Why aren't you guys spicing this up? And nowadays, you get games like Gloomhaven and Root and these other games that are very different and have a very different play every time you sit down to them. And I think back then people were like, no, I want to grind this out. I want to play Race for the Galaxy 30 times this weekend so that I can really figure out just the right way to do that. And I just don't think that's what the market is looking for in games anymore. Right. And I'll be curious in 10 years from now, if somebody listens to this, they may go, oh, you're crazy. Stuff that was put out in 2022, I mean, that stuff was terrible. It was all crazy and it was unstructured, and who knows, they may have a completely different
30-page rule books with 20-page appendixes and a 10-page FAQ.
Yeah, and you just don't know. And you can argue that people have been more innovative, but I think it's more like fashion, where it's more what is in the style of what people are looking for and what people want to talk about when they're on the internet talking about this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see that very apparently with deck builders. I mean, Dominion came out and it was absolutely revolutionary because nothing like it had ever come before. You can argue StarCraft, but the
Dominion put it front and center and in your face.
Yeah, and with StarCraft, you are building a small deck, but like having the market and actually building your deck and just doing, I mean, how long did it take for Thunderstone, Ascension, Legendary, like
dozens
Core Worlds,
out.
And then the hundreds of deck builders that have come since.
Yeah,
I mean, you're absolutely right. You get one thing, we get hyper focused on it, and the publishers know that. And they got to get their piece of the pie.
That's the style. That's what everybody wants.
And so I think deck builders are just now kind of fading out. Like maybe in the last 5 years even, they've kind of started fading away.
They'll find their way back.
They'll find their way back. But, the ones that are good and have been going for a long time, like Dominion, like, Star Realms, Hero Realms, all the Realms games. Legendary still kind of going. So
Thunderstone.
I don't want to talk about Thunderstone.
Can I ask a question about StarCraft?
Go ahead.
Is that the one with the 3 factions? The humans?
Yep.
Yes.
That's a deck builder?
There's a small deck building component inside of it, and that's generally considered the first instance of somebody doing deck building, where what your weapons are, you can purchase new weapons and put them into your deck, so that when you get into a battle, you draw your cards.
I got it now. I remember.
Suddenly you have these added weapons.
I don't think I've ever gotten a play-in of StarCraft.
No, that's a big bite. That's not going to be a Monday night, but maybe we'll find a weekend day or a holiday, and we'll go after StarCraft.
Yeah.
Can I play up to 6?
We have that, right?
We do have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should.
We've played it a couple times.
I know you guys played it.
Bought that for $40
in Delaware at some point, but I wasn't able to join in for some reason.
Yeah. We're getting sidetracked, so that means that we are probably exhausting all the conversation that we have for Kingsburg. So let's wrap this up and tie it in a nice little bow. John,
Sir,
if you were going to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, using the Board Game Geek scale, because everyone uses it, and I think it's
perfect.
I'm going to say it's a gold standard, but it's kind of like a bronze standard. It just happens to be the one that we use.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, where would you put Kingsburg on the 1 to 10?
Earlier, I had this rated a 7. I think now, a 7.
All right. Chris?
I like Kingsburg. I'm glad that I won. But, I think about all the other games and what it's going up against. So I'd have to give it barely a 7.
Okay. Sam?
I
Despite how much you dislike it.
I
mean,
don't
you
like
have to-
Kingsburg.
You have to remember that one game that you played that you really liked. And I mean, and besides what you like or don't like, you gotta take into account the whole package. So taking into account the whole package.
There are bits of design here that I like, and I could see this being good as like an introductory for someone to be like, look at how cool games could be.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, I got to give it like maybe a barely a 7. Like
Okay, I mean, so it's up in the 7.
like rounding up.
Okay.
Like it's
I mean,
begrudging.
Yeah, so this you make a good point. This is a good like stepping stone game. Like you've played Ticket to Ride a few times, and you want to make the next step, and you want to try something a little more thematic, something that's not trains or building a French city in a field with a river running through it. I could see pulling this out and showing it to somebody after, somebody early in their gaming career.
Yeah, it looks complex. Then you play it and discover that it isn't.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you're just starting out, you're not going to have the perspective to see that it's hollow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I think Stephen hit the nail on the head with, you give this to somebody that they've been playing, card games and, Carcassonne, Settlers of Catan. You give this to them, they think it's the greatest thing on the face of the earth, like we did back then.
Mm-hmm.
But then you introduce them to some more elaborate
meatier
games
examples?
that have some depth.
If
in
you're
them.
gamers that play Eclipse or Root or Ark Nova even.
The fashions have changed.
Yeah.
This is a good gateway game.
It's shallow now. I think it was shallow then too.
Oh, I think it is shallow. I mean, nothing has changed about the depth.
Yeah.
But it's a gateway board game.
Yeah.
All right.
So your grade, Steven?
So I'm giving it a 7. It's it's a solid game. It's been a solid game for the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't regret playing. I regretted that the expansion wasn't available because I really feel like
That's Chris's fault.
a couple, as I said, there's 4 or 5 modules. I like the module model of expansions because you can add just a little at a time.
The pieces you like, too.
And the pieces that you like. It's not like when you say throw all the expansions to Race for the Galaxy together. You've got this massive deck that just makes no sense and isn't cohesive at all. Not that most people throw all 4 expansions together, but with the Kingsburg and the modules, you can play with the shields and say, you know what, I don't like these, and you can just leave those in the box. But then you can play with the alternate village tiles, and those are fun. So next time we play, we'll give those a shot again. Alhambra is the same way. Like you
Dozens
get
of little pieces of expansions.
You get the Alhambra big box, and you've got 12 different expansion modules. And
No change for you.
Right.
You can throw 1 or 2 in at a time, and kind of play around with it and figure out what your favorite mode is. And so, I was a little disappointed when we didn't have that, but
That's because of Chris.
it is Chris's fault, yes. But in the end, I did enjoy the game. And it's like we said with Acquire, it's like we said with Biblios. Like sometimes you need a game that you don't have to like be hyper vigilant and just overthink everything. Like sometimes you need a game that, while it has decisions, they're not the most difficult decisions. Like, you don't have to think in a branching logic tree that's 7 steps to figure out what your next move is going to be. You look at your dice and you say, there's a place I can go, and it looks like it's going to be beneficial to me.
But then what's even the point?
Well, the point is sometimes the game doesn't need to be the center of attention. Sometimes you're sitting down to really play something and really get that burn. And other times you just want to be with your buds and you want 2 fingers of whiskey sitting in a glass next to you and you want to be able to play. In a game like this, you can either play with your kids or you can play with guys like us where you can pull a beer out or do whatever you like and you know, talk about the important issues of the day while you're playing it.
I guess.
I enjoy hanging out with you guys.
Sometimes it's nice to decompress while still having an experience that requires you to think a little bit.
Mosaic brought some stress.
Mosaic didn't bring any stress for me.
Oh, yes, it did. You go ahead and listen to that last podcast we did, and you can hear how tired you are.
That was not because of Mosaic.
It's a little bit of Mosaic.
No, I really wasn't.
It was a little bit of Mosaic.
That was because work has been crazy. Kingsburg just... There's
doesn't do it for you.
I know. I want to think about it. I want to think hard about it, and the thinking doesn't go anywhere. And I'm like, oh, okay. So what was the point?
It's not your kind of game.
It's not my kind of game. I have to say, I think I would try it with the expansions, but failing that, I'm perfectly happy for this been the last time I played Kingsburg.
All right. Well, that's Kingsburg. It's Sam's not favorite game.
Let's take it out to the fire pit.
Let's not go that far yet. This isn't
hard to find.
This isn't trade pile worthy yet. So that's Kingsburg. Thank you for joining our conversation. And anyone else got anything else?
I'm good.
All right, awesome.
See ya.
John, Chris, Sam, and I thank you for joining us in conversation about Kingsburg. You can join us in conversation by visiting our website, cellargames.com, where you can find links to our social media and Discord server. We also have a blog and a guild on Board Game Geek. We look forward to hearing from you.